If you've ever watched a Bond movie or a spy show, you may have wondered, that spy that has all those fake second passports, could they have a real second passport? Can a spy apply the principles of Nomad Capitalist to protect themselves while working for an intelligence agency? And today I'm going to answer that question and give you some tips that you probably haven't thought of about your own passport. So over the years, we've worked with a few different folks who have or used to have security clearances. And their general position was, I can't have a second citizenship. In some cases, I can't even have a second residence. They wanted to play it safe, and they said the kind of security clearance I have or had, I just shouldn't do it. In some cases, there was monitoring after they had the security clearance to make sure like they weren't doing anything wrong. They also would tell us how they couldn't travel to certain countries or shouldn't travel to certain countries because their name would be in some database and they were known as someone who had a security clearance. And so one particular person said, even if I can get a visa, I can't go to Iran. Other people mentioned other countries. I just can't go there. I will get in trouble. However, I came across an interesting article recently from clearancejobs.com. This is a blog for the government and for the intelligence community, I understand. And they talked about whether spies can have second passports. And they also gave some tips on that you can use to make sure that you're claiming all the citizenships that you can. So I'll get to those later. I'm Mr Henderson, founder of Nomad Capitalist. We help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce their taxes, protect their assets, increase their freedom, and grow their opportunities. So here's the article. It says, foreign influence and foreign preference are both guidelines that can trip up security clearance applicants. A part of the confusion comes from changes in the past 10 years to how Department of Defense in the U.S., security clearance holders should handle foreign passports and foreign citizenship. Country of origin is a factor in the security clearance eligibility process, but it all comes down to risk and not a criticism and critique of an individual or group. So basically, what seems pretty logical and what we've heard about is if you are in the U.S. and you want to get a clearance and you have a passport of an allied country, that's going to be more straightforward in many cases. Every security clearance is different, as I understand, than if you happen to have been born in Iran. And then, okay, hey, you're a great guy who's born in Iran, but it still says here you're born in Iran. And thanks to the United States, by the way, every passport, obviously you're going to tell them this when you apply for a security clearance, but every passport pretty much in the world now says where you were born. It's not supposed to be a commentary on the individual's patriotism or lack thereof. It's really supposed to be that there are external factors that create a security risk because of this person's ties to a foreign country, says Sean Bigley, a security clearance attorney. There are specific countries where one is required to exercise their country of origin passport. There are also instances where traveling on a foreign passport is easier due to visa issues. Bigley notes that recent policy changes have made it easier for clearance holders to take advantage of the conveniences or necessities of using a foreign passport during overseas travel. And he goes on to add, as long as there's a reason you can articulate, it's not really that big of a deal. And so the idea is, can a spy have a second passport? It seems like the answer is, if it's easier for them to travel overseas, if it allows them to get over to a certain country, if it gives them some benefit that the home country or the host country doesn't have with their passport, then they may allow that, but you have to, of course, explain it. And so I can tell you from our limited experience, folks are kind of afraid of getting second passports. We had someone who said after getting rid of the security clearance, okay, now I'm open to doing it, and now I can do it. But certainly it's something that you have to be careful with. Now, here's the part that I think is important. And this applies to everybody, spy or not. Not everyone who has dual citizenship is a foreign passport, says Bigley. He noted that some applicants falsely assume that simply because they destroyed a previous passport or rescinded citizenship, they are no longer a citizen of a foreign country, but that's not necessarily the case. This is important, and as someone who is no longer a U.S. citizen, I can tell you there's a few banks, there's a few borders that I've been to around the world where they're confused because they're saying, I see you have a U.S. passport and it's not expired. Why aren't you using that one? What's your problem? Or it says here you were born in the United States. Why do you refuse to fill out this paperwork as if you're a U.S. citizen? And so people perhaps have a hard time understanding if you have canceled a nationality. In my case, it's generally in Eastern Europe where potentially those people are like, why would you, I'd like to be a U.S. citizen. Why would you get rid of it? And so they just don't understand kind of beyond their own thought process. But what also happens is people think that if they shred their foreign passport, or during the Vietnam War, people were like lighting them on fire, burning their U.S. passports. If people sign a form or create some kind of affidavit that they're giving up their foreign citizenship, if they simply don't take advantage of the benefits of having the foreign citizenship, then that will necessarily cancel it. Now, it says here in the article also, if you go to the local embassy and renounce your citizenship, yeah, that's pretty much how it works. That is how you renounce citizenship in most cases. But the point is, simply shredding your passport, lighting it on fire, of course, doesn't mean you're no longer a citizen. So if you're a U.S. citizen, like, I'm tired of paying taxes, you got to go to the embassy and go through the proper process and file the proper tax forms when you leave. You can't just light your passport on fire and say it's over. You also can't issue, private affidavits or anything like that. You've got to go, in the case of the U.S., to the embassy. That's the case in many countries. But the bigger thing is, people think, I don't have a passport, therefore I'm not a citizen. I hear this all the time. Oh, I'm American and I'm German, but I haven't renewed the German passports. That doesn't count. It absolutely counts. Now, if you have a citizenship that does not allow dual citizenship, and then you subsequently obtained another citizenship, and that government's aware of it, they may have canceled your citizenship, and so you may not have it anymore. But simply letting a passport expire or not having a valid passport isn't an issue. If that were the case, 2/3 of Americans would be stateless. Having a passport is not what makes you a citizen. Being a citizen is what makes you a citizen, whatever that may be. If you were born in a country in the Americas and a handful of others like Fiji and Pakistan, you're a citizen by birth, whether you like it or not. And so you may not even be able to renounce that until you're an adult, because most countries don't want you to renounce citizenship as a child. And so if you were born in the United States or Canada or Mexico or most places in the Americas, you're a citizen of that country. We will occasionally have a client that's like, oh, my parents were in Cancun. I was born in Cancun. You're a Mexican citizen. Or my mom was born in Mexico City. Your mom's Mexican. She should claim it, and then potentially you can claim it. And so in the new world, citizenship is given by birth. But you may also have citizenship through a parent. I've seen situations where people didn't realize their parent registered them, like in the former Soviet Union. Parents would list their children in their passport, and then the parent would travel with the passport, and then the kids' names would be like in the back, and so you would just need this one passport for the parent and the children. And so there's been situations where someone's like, oh, I wasn't aware, I don't think I'm that citizen. And then they go back and they realize that they actually hold that. I've seen that in a number of countries, especially like where the country has changed, like Yugoslavia broke up, the Soviet Union broke up, and so you realize, oh, my mother was Croatian, I should go register. And so you want to look at where you may have been registered as a child. You want to look at where you were born or where your parents were born. You want to look at any factor that would have granted you a citizenship. And just because you don't have a passport doesn't mean that you're not a citizen. Also, just because you don't use the citizenship means nothing. So I had a friend who lived in Asia for about 25 years. Never once went to the United States. And people were like, well, what happens when you go back? Like, is there some special procedure? No, you're a citizen. You just go back. And so for the first time in 25 years, he came back. He entered the United States. He showed his passport. They just said, hey, well, welcome home. Right? He would have had at that point, get a passport, because passports aren't good for that long. He had to get a new U.S. passport, obviously for any travel he did around Asia, at the U.S. Embassy where he lived. And then he used that passport to come back to the United States, and nothing changed. In the case of the United States, he was always liable for taxes, subject to the exceptions and exclusions. So I think that he pretty much used the full exclusion. He didn't have a U.S. tax liability, but he still had to file a tax return. If you're any other country's citizen, then if you're not living there and you've done the proper tax planning, you probably don't have a tax obligation. I'm not giving you tax advice, but that's how most other countries work. If you don't live there, you don't pay tax. And so in that case, you just get the passport and you go visit. You go back to live, whatever the case may be. So people have this idea that, like, if you don't use the passport, if you don't live in the country, that something changes. That's not true. So the big rule is make sure that you have all the passports of the countries that you're a citizen of. And you may be a citizen of countries that you're not aware of. And you may just think like, oh, again, I was just, Boris Johnson, right, was born in the United States, spent a few years living in New York as a child. Thought like because he left, his obligations as an American citizen ended. It's not how it works. You have to formally renounce it. And so he had all the benefits and burdens that came with being a U.S. citizen well into the time that he was well known in the UK. And so just because you don't think of yourself as an American doesn't mean you're not an American. Just because you don't think of yourself as a nationality that one of your parents has, they may have registered you. They may have, if you're born outside of the United States, your parent can still go and register you if they're American at the consulate, at the embassy, and say, hey, I gave birth to a child, please make them American. All right? And so understand which citizenships you have, or may have, or should have, or which ones you can claim from your parents and other ancestors, and then understand that just because you don't have the actual document doesn't mean that you have any less of a status. Theoretically, if you show up in a country most countries, even if you don't have a passport now, good luck getting on a plane potentially, but most countries, they'll just put you in a back room and they'll figure out like, okay, like let's prove this person's a citizen. They'll often say that's not how it works, but I mean, you can talk to consular officers, even in the United States, for example, and they'll say, if someone shows up in the United States with no passport, we've got to figure out, is this person an American citizen? And so, that's the rights of a citizen, is you get to come to your country. Forget Australia not letting people in during the pandemic. I mean, that's not how citizenship should work. But understand that citizenship transcends having the passport. And if you understand that, you'll be able to use any citizenships you have, whether it's 1, 2, or more, much more effectively.